A pregnant widow was left to starve until a broken widower made her his family. The wind clawed at the eaves like a thing starving. Snow fell in a slow, cruel hush, burying fences, blurring the path that used to be a road. Winter had moved in and made itself king, and Ella June was kneeling on the frozen floorboards of what was once her home, fingers wrapped around a splintered bowl of nothing. She stirred anyway. The movement was a habit now. Stir, scrape, swallow air, pretend it was soup. Pretend the fire still burned high. Pretend her husband's boots still sat beside the door, drying from chores he'd come in from, laughing about the wind and kissing her neck with red-cheeked affection. But the fire had long since died, and the boots were gone, buried under snow, or taken by someone passing through with colder eyes than hers. The baby inside her shifted. Ella winced and pressed a hand to her swollen belly. Almost 8 months. She'd whispered it to herself every morning, like a prayer or a threat. 8 months, and still breathing. 8 months, and no more wood. 8 months, and nobody coming. When Isaac died, there hadn't been time to mourn. Pneumonia took him like a thief in the dark. One day coughing, the next burning, the next gone. His body, stiff and pale, lay in the lean-to for 2 days, before the ground softened enough to dig. She buried him alone. Didn't cry. Couldn't. Crying felt like a luxury for women who weren't already starving. After that, the silence set. Neighbors stopped coming. She wasn't sure if it was the snow or the way Isaac's body had looked when they found out. Some folks thought death could linger like smoke, cling to doorknobs and breath. Maybe they were afraid to catch it, or maybe they just had their own troubles. The wind howled again, and the windows shivered in their frames. Ella stood slowly, hand braced on the crooked table. Her knees ached from cold. The baby kicked again, sharper this time. She whispered to it without meaning to. "I know. I'm trying." She moved to the hearth, where ashes slumped in a grey curl. There was no wood left, but she lit a stub of candle she'd been saving, not for light, but for the sound. The tiny hiss and catch of flame felt like company. Her fingers traced the stone mantel. A photograph still sat there. Isaac, not looking at the camera but at her, eyes crinkled at the edges like he was hearing her hum in the other room. That morning she'd been baking bread, the good kind, with honey in the mix. He'd stolen a piece while it was still hot, and laughed when it burned his tongue. That sound lived inside her still, but it was quieter now, like something you heard from underwater. There was no more honey, no more flour. She'd tried grinding bark, tried boiling snow with pine needles. Hunger was clever. It taught you things you never wanted to know, like how to chew slow so your stomach didn't cramp, how to sip melted wax if your lips cracked, how to dream of food so real you woke up tasting it. She walked to the door, pulled on the too big coat that used to be Isaac's. It smelled like dust now, not him. She stepped outside. Snow swallowed her boots. The sky was the color of old bruises, heavy and low. She moved toward the half-collapsed chicken coop, though there hadn't been chicken since the fox got the last one. She still checked. Still hoped. A shape darted past her, not a fox, a man. She stopped. The man slowed near the fence line, tall, wore a coat patched in too many places. He looked up, met her eyes, then tipped his hat in that way men do when they want to seem harmless, but aren't. "Didn't expect to see you still here, Ella June." His voice cracked like frost underfoot. She said nothing, just clutched her belly, and waited. He stepped closer, smiled without warmth. "You need anything? I could bring you some supplies. Trade, maybe." Her lips stayed sealed. He looked her over, slow. Took in the sunken cheeks, the trembling knees, the way her other hand slipped instinctively toward the knife she no longer kept. He laughed then, soft and mean. "You'll think about it, I reckon." He left without another word. She stayed outside long enough for her fingers to go numb, then longer still. When she finally went back in, the door stuck like it didn't want to let her go. She closed it gently behind her, leaned her forehead against it, and exhaled like someone much older. The baby moved again. She spoke aloud, not to the child, not really, more to the air, the stillness, the dust. "I won't let you be born. In this kind of world." Her voice was small, hoarse from disuse, but she didn't believe her own promise. Not yet. That night, she tried burning the legs off a broken chair. The smoke was thick, bitter. Her eyes stung, but she didn't stop. Heat bloomed faintly into the room, clinging to the edges like a ghost too weak to stay. She took down the quilt from the wall, wrapped herself and her belly tight, and curled on the floor near the embers. The wind moaned through the cracks. She dreamt of warmth, of bread she couldn't eat, of Isaac's laugh and the child's cry. They'd never heard. She woke to silence. Real silence, the kind that presses on your chest. Outside, snow kept falling, but it felt further away somehow. Her lips were cracked and dry. She touched them, blood. In the stillness, she whispered, "I'm sorry." The baby didn't move. She closed her eyes. Time passed, or maybe it didn't. The line blurred, then distant hoofbeats, faint but sure, not the uncertain stumble of someone wandering. Purposeful, steady. She didn't move, didn't open her eyes. The knock came quiet, then louder. "Ella." The voice was deep, familiar but old, like it had rusted with the years. "Ella, it's Caleb Rourke." She still didn't move. The door creaked open. A gust of cold swept in, but there was no cruelty in it now, only urgency. Then warmth. Arms. A voice that muttered, a curse at the cold, and lifted her like she weighed nothing. She cracked her eyes open. Snowflakes clung to a dark beard, eyes like storm clouds, not because they were dark, but because they held weight. "You fool girl," he whispered, not angry, just broken-hearted. She tried to smile, but her lips didn't. "Move right, Caleb." He didn't answer, just wrapped her tighter in his coat and carried her out into the storm. And for the first time in months, Ella let herself be held. Let herself believe, just for a second, that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe someone had remembered. The baby kicked, faint, but alive, and Ella, despite everything, began to cry. The axe struck clean, the sound dull in the thick air. Snow had blanketed everything, and the quiet that followed each swing felt heavier than the cold. Caleb Rourke split the log, set another, swung again. It was habit more than need. The woodshed was full. He hadn't touched most of the firewood since December. Still, each morning he cut more. There was something in the rhythm. Something in the ache of his shoulders and the sting of wind against his jaw that kept him from drifting too far into thought. The house behind him sat squat and stubborn against the white hills. Smoke curled from its chimney, slow and steady. Inside, the fire never died, not since last winter, not since Evelyn. Caleb wiped his brow with the back of his glove, though it wasn't sweat so much as a reflex. He looked toward the far ridge where the trees broke and the land sloped down, into the basin where other lives had been carved into the snow. Ella June's place was somewhere out there, just a small shape tucked between cottonwoods, miles from anything kind. He hadn't seen her since autumn, hadn't spoken more than 3 words to her since her wedding. She'd looked too young, in that white dress, nervous and glowing all the same, her hand clutching Isaac's like it was the only thing tethering her to earth. Caleb remembered the way she'd looked at her new husband, not like he was perfect, but like he was hers. He remembered how Evelyn used to look at him like that too, in the years before the silence came between them, before the miscarriages, the doctor's quiet voice, the loss that had no funeral. He split another log. 3 days ago, he'd seen no smoke from Ella's chimney. Maybe she was out of wood, maybe she'd gone into town, but yesterday, and again today, the flue had stayed bare, not even a wisp. That kind of cold didn't forgive carelessness. That kind of cold killed. Still, he didn't go. He told himself it wasn't his business. He hadn't spoken to her since Isaac died. He barely spoke to anyone at all anymore. The last time he'd gone into town, it had been for salt and lantern, oil, and he'd left without saying a word to the shopkeeper. What would he even say? Do you need help? Do you want me to save you? No, that wasn't why he would go, and that was why he hadn't. But as the morning wore on, and the sun never once showed its face, he found himself brushing off his saddle and checking the straps, not with urgency, just inevitability. By midday, he was riding down the slope, the wind cutting through the scarf at his neck, his breath clouding in front of him. The snow was knee-deep, and the trail had vanished. He followed memory more than sight. When he reached her cabin, the silence felt wrong. The door sagged slightly open. No light inside. No sound. Caleb dismounted, boots crunching over frost-bitten steps. He knocked once, softly, then pushed inside. She was on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of breath. A candle had burned itself down to the nub. Wax spilled like tears across the floorboards. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked, skin nearly translucent. For a long moment he didn't move. He just looked. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because something inside him had gone still. Then, with careful steps, he knelt beside her, slid his arms beneath her body, feeling how little weight she had left. The curve of her belly made his throat tighten. She murmured something, maybe a name, maybe nothing, and her hand fluttered weakly against his chest. He lifted her, one slow breath at a time, and carried her out into the snow. The ride back was wordless. She stirred once against him, tried to lift her head, failed. Caleb adjusted his coat around her and pressed his gloved hand over her shoulder. The horse knew the way. The world had shrunk to the sound of hooves and breath, and the pulse beating at his temple. When they reached his cabin, he didn't hesitate. He opened the door with his boot, carried her in, and laid her gently on the cot beside the fire. The warmth had never meant much to him since Evelyn passed. Now it had a reason. He set to work without noise, took off her boots, unwrapped the quilt, pulled another over her, lit the second stove to boil water, searched the shelves for broth and ground barley. There wasn't much, but it would do. Outside, the storm thickened. The wind rose, and with it came a sharpness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He glanced at her, still asleep, still breathing shallow. That's when he saw it. A small, wooden button near her collar, one he recognized. Evelyn had sewn it into a blanket years ago, a spare, a tiny thing. Ella must have found it at a community quilting meet, taken it without knowing. Or maybe she had known. He looked away. Hours passed. The broth simmered. He spooned it gently into her mouth, and she swallowed in half-sleep. Her lips trembled, but no words came. He touched her wrist. Cold, but the pulse was stronger now. The baby kicked once under the blanket. He watched the movement and then looked away again. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire and listened to the wood crackle and her breath steady. Once, he reached out and adjusted the blanket, just slightly. His fingers brushed hers. She didn't wake, but her face softened. He stood then and walked to the small workbench by the window. Beneath it, a pile of cedar boards waited. Months ago, he'd planned to build a cradle, not for use, not for anyone, just to keep his hands busy. But he hadn't, not then. Now he reached for a board and ran his hand over the grain. He'd start in the morning. When the light rose, over the ridge, Ella's eyes fluttered open. The fire had burned low but steady. She turned her head slightly and saw him sitting in the corner, sharpening a chisel, quiet as a stone. "You came," she said, though it was barely more than a breath. He looked at her, nodded once. "Didn't think anyone would," she said. He didn't answer right away, just laid the chisel down, stood, and walked to the stove. He poured a cup of hot water, wrapped it in a cloth, and placed it in her hands. "You're safe now," he said. Then he went back to the fire, back to his tools, and let the silence fill in the spaces between them. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt softer, warmer. It felt like the beginning of something else. The broth tasted like warmth, like something long forgotten. Ella sipped slowly, fingers trembling around the cup. She didn't ask where the meat had come from. She didn't ask why the man across the room hadn't spoken more than a dozen words in 3 days. Some things didn't need explaining, they just needed to be. The fire crackled low beside her cot. A quilt she didn't recognize covered her legs, thick and worn, patched with care. Everything in this house seemed built by someone who used his hands more than his voice. Quiet corners, smooth handles. A cradle half finished near the window, as if someone had started carving hope into wood and stopped halfway. She glanced at Caleb. He was kneeling by the hearth, feeding it pine kindling, face lit amber by flame. He moved slowly, precisely, as if every gesture mattered. He hadn't asked questions, not about Isaac, not about the baby, not about the man who'd come knocking with a too-wide smile weeks ago. She couldn't decide if that silence was a kindness or a wound. On the second night, she tried to stand and walk. Her legs buckled, but she caught herself on the chair before falling. Caleb didn't rush. He just looked up, nodded once, and said, "Lean on the frame. Right side stronger." She nodded back. Thank you didn't seem like enough, so she didn't say it. He brewed tea that evening, something with mint and dry orange peel. The scent filled the room and clung to her skin. She found herself waiting for it the next day, then the one after that. On the 5th morning, snow hissed against the windows, and the wind sang low and bitter through the seams of the cabin. She woke to the smell of porridge and a pan warming on the stove. Caleb wasn't inside. She sat up, slowly, muscles aching, from too much stillness. The baby rolled in her belly, restless but steady. She touched the curve of herself and whispered, "Not much longer, little light." The name had come to her weeks ago, whispered in the dark of her old house, when hunger made the world tilt. It didn't make sense, not really, but it stayed. A light that hadn't gone out yet. The door opened, and Caleb stepped in with an armful of logs dusted with snow. His scarf was iced stiff, beard grayer than she remembered. He set the wood down without a word and nodded toward the table. "Eat what you can." She did. He sat across from her, slowly, spoon in hand, and they ate in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but shared. When she finally looked up, she said, "You're kind. You don't have to be." He didn't look at her, just stirred his spoon. "It's not kindness. It's what's right." She wanted to say more, but the words didn't form. Later that day, she wandered to the window, watching the storm drag its fingers across the hills. In the field below, a deer stumbled through the drifts, head down, legs shivering. Caleb stood beside her without announcing his presence. "It'll die out there," she said. "Maybe," he answered. He didn't offer more. In the afternoon, she found herself watching him work. He was mending the cradle, chiseling gently, smoothing the edges. His hands were large, weathered, precise. She could tell it wasn't just a chore. It was something quieter than that, a way to remember, or maybe a way to forget. "Whose was it meant to be?" she asked. He paused, glanced at her, then back at the wood. "No one's, now." She didn't press. That evening, after dinner, she reached into her coat pocket, one she hadn't touched since being carried through the snow. Her fingers found a small figure, wood, barely carved, rough around the edges. It was a bird, or close to one. Isaac had carved it for her the week before he died, hands shaking even then. She used to hold it in her palm when the nights got long. She placed it gently on the table beside Caleb's tools before going to bed. He didn't say anything, just stared at it for a long time. In the dark, she lay awake, hand on her belly, listening to the wind and the faint sound of carving from the other room. Not rushed, not loud, just steady. In the days that followed, they fell into something that might have been routine. Caleb rose early, made tea. She folded blankets, cleaned bowls, mended socks she found in a drawer. It was strange how easily the shape of another life began to form around her. One morning, while peeling potatoes, she caught herself humming. She hadn't sung since the burial. The sound startled her, soft and low, like hearing a ghost in her own throat. She looked up to see Caleb glance over, then back to the fire. He didn't smile, not fully, but his shoulders eased. That night she dreamt of Isaac, not dying, but standing in the garden, laughing as snowflakes landed in his beard. She woke with tears on her face and tried to hide them. Caleb didn't ask, just handed her a cup and sat nearby, eyes on the flames. She looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't just quiet. He was tired in a way only grief could carve into a man. But beneath it, beneath the silence and calloused hands, there was gentleness, a deep kind that asked for nothing in return. "Thank you," she said one morning, voice small. "For what?" "For letting me stay. For not asking me to explain." He shook his head. "Don't need to know a thing to see you needed help." The cradle was nearly finished now. She watched him sand the corners smooth, one stroke at a time. "You don't have to keep building it." "I know," he said. Then, after a pause, added, "But I want to." On the 7th night, they shared dinner by candlelight, not because it was special, but because the oil lamp had run dry and neither of them had gone to town. They didn't need the light to see each other now. She reached across the table, fingers brushing the bird he'd placed beside her bowl. Not the one Isaac had carved, a new one, smaller, more delicate, its wings open. "For the baby?" she asked. He nodded. She didn't know what to say. Instead, she tucked it into the folds of her shawl, close to her heart. Outside, the storm began to lift. The wind softened to sighs. Ella looked out the window and whispered to herself, "We might make it, little light." Caleb didn't speak, but he turned his chair slightly toward her, as if to say, "You already are." The storm rolled in slow, like something gathering its thoughts. It didn't come in loud, not at first. Just a shift in the air, a certain stillness that made the trees stop whispering and the animals quiet their tracks. The clouds turned the color of steel, and by dusk the first flakes fell, soft, heavy, deliberate. Caleb stacked the last of the split logs near the hearth, shaking snow from his shoulders. Ella sat nearby, her feet tucked beneath her, knitting something small with trembling hands. She was better now, not strong, not yet, but steadier. She could walk without leaning on the table, could speak without losing breath. Her face had color again, faint but warm. The child inside her moved often. She no longer flinched when it kicked. He watched her in brief glances. He didn't want to make her self-conscious, but there was something about the way she worked now, the way she held the yarn between her fingers like it meant something, that made him want to carve something else. Maybe, not from wood this time, but from the silence between them. "You shouldn't be out long tomorrow," she said, not looking up. "Storm's thickening fast. Won't go out unless I need to." She nodded, then added, "I might try walking the loop around the barn. Just to stretch. You're welcome to." She smiled, tired but honest. That smile, he thought, had taken longer to arrive than the storm. It was nearly dark when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Not curious, not cautious. Caleb stilled. Ella froze. They both knew what that kind of knock meant. He stepped to the door, slow and quiet, and opened it just enough to see the man standing there. Tall, wrapped in a patched coat slick with wet snow, a crooked grin under a grey moustache. the kind of man who smiled like he was already owed something. "Evening, Rourke," the man said, nodding once. His eyes were sharp, darting past Caleb to the room behind him. "Didn't expect to find you out here. Figured you'd gone to Texas, or heaven, or hell. Still here. Reckon you are." A beat of silence. "I was looking for someone. Thought maybe she passed through this way. No one's passed through here but snow and wind," Caleb said. "That so?" Man squinted. "'Cause I was told Ella June might have made her way this direction. Word was she weren't dead after all. That she'd run off, carrying Isaac's kid, and not much else." Caleb didn't blink. Snow dripping from the eaves pattered against the porch like ticking clocks. "She's not here," he said. The man nodded slowly, looked up at the roofline. Then, down at the doorframe. "You ever meet her husband? Good man. Didn't know how to pick 'em, but decent all the same." Caleb stayed quiet. The man let out a slow breath, steam curling past his lips. "Well, if you see her, tell her John Merritt stopped by. Let her know I'd still be willing to help her. Still got a room and a fire, same as always." Caleb didn't move, didn't nod. Just watched until the man turned and walked back into the storm, boots crunching down the trail. When he closed the door, Ella was standing, pale, one hand pressed against her belly, the other gripping the chair back like it might vanish. "It's him," she said. Caleb nodded. He knew, not sure how. She sat slowly, eyes distant. Her fingers shook, and the bird he'd carved, her favorite one, the one she always kept near, fell from her lap and clattered to the floor. "I thought he was done," she whispered. "Thought he'd moved on. Some men don't move on. They just wait for the wind to change." She looked at him then, and in her eyes was something harder than fear, a tiredness that didn't mean giving up, just the knowing that some things, no matter how far you run, find their way back. What do? We wait. He'll come back. Probably. Caleb crouched and picked up the bird, setting it gently back in her hand. "I won't let him take anything from you." She didn't say thank you, just curled her fingers tight around the bird and nodded. That night, Caleb sat by the fire with the rifle across his knees. The cradle, now finished, gleamed faintly in the firelight. He hadn't asked if she wanted it. He just built it, slow and careful, like a promise. She didn't sleep much, neither did he. The next morning, the storm buried the porch under a drift so high they had to dig their way out. Ella tried to help, but her body protested with sharp aches, and he waved. Her back inside. The wind howled louder now. The world outside the windows had turned to white blur and shifting shadow. "John wouldn't come in a storm like this," she said. "No," Caleb answered, "but when it breaks, he will." And he was right. 2 days later, the wind softened. The snow stopped. The sky cleared, blue as a blade. Caleb was chopping wood again when he saw the tracks, fresh, single set, leading to the barn. He dropped the axe, strode quick and quiet back to the cabin. Inside, Ella was at the stove. She turned when she saw his face. "Stay here," he said. "Lock the door behind me." She didn't argue, just nodded once, firmly. Caleb walked to the barn, rifle in hand. The door creaked open, and there he was, John, leaning against the stall post like he belonged there. "You've got good timber, Rourke. Always said that. This isn't a visit." The man straightened, hands out, palms empty. "Ain't looking for a fight, just want what's owed." "Nothing's owed." "She's carrying a child," John said, voice tightening. "Needs a man. I offered to be one. Isaac's gone. She's alone." "She's not alone." John smirked. "Since when are you her keeper?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "Since I found her near Frozen Belly. Round. No one looking. Since I sat by her bed and watched her breathe just to be sure she would. Since I saw her fight to live when dying would have been easier." The smirk dropped. "You got feelings for her?" "I've got respect for her. That's more than you ever had." John took a step forward. Caleb didn't move. "You'll shoot me?" he asked. "In your barn, for a woman who ain't yours?" "I'll do what I have to do," Caleb said. "But if you walk away now, there'll be no blood. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, John lifted his hands higher and back toward the door. "You're a fool, Rourke," he said. "But you always were." Caleb said nothing. John turned, trudged back into the snow, and didn't look back. Caleb stood, still until the figure disappeared over the hill. Then he walked back to the cabin, slow, deliberate, like someone carrying something sacred. Inside, Ella was standing by the window. She turned, searching his face. "It's done," he said. She nodded, walked over, took the rifle from his hands, and set it against the wall. "He's gone? Gone." He stood there, unsure what came next. She stepped closer, reached up, placed her hand lightly against his chest. "Thank you. You don't need to." "I do." Her voice trembled. "I haven't felt safe since the day Isaac coughed blood into the snow. Not once, not until this." He didn't know what to say, so he didn't. Instead, she leaned her forehead to his shoulder, and he let her stay there. The fire crackled, the cradle waited. Outside, the wind turned warm for the first time in weeks, and inside, something stirred that wasn't fear or grief, but the start of something new. The first pain came like a ripple through her spine, subtle but certain. Ella paused at the sink, hand resting on the edge, and waited. It passed. She pressed her palm to her belly, where the child rolled beneath her ribs like a restless tide. Caleb was outside splitting kindling, sleeves rolled, steam rising from his breath. It had been 3 weeks since John Merritt vanished into the snow, and with each passing day, the fear he would return faded into a shadow that no longer reached the door. Ella had not spoken much of what came before, what John had done, or tried to. But she didn't need to. Her silence said enough, and Caleb in his way understood the language of things left unsaid. He didn't push. He simply stayed. The pain came again, sharper. She breathed through it and stepped back from the basin. The time was near. When Caleb came in, snow clinging to his boots, she was kneeling by the cradle. The soft blanket she'd knit was folded over its rim, the little carved bird tucked into the corner. He stopped mid-step. Ella looked up, face pale but calm. "It's starting," she said. He didn't panic, didn't raise his voice, or start pacing like Isaac would have. He simply nodded, removed his coat, and went to boil water. She labored through. The evening, breath caught between sharp contractions and long silences. Caleb stayed close, moving with the kind of focus that came not from experience, but from deep care. He laid towels near the fire, brought more blankets, steadied her hand when the pain bent her forward. "It's too early," she whispered once, sweat slick on her brow. "You're strong," he answered, not as a comfort, but as a fact. The storm outside thickened again, though neither of them noticed. Wind clawed at the shutters and rattled the windows like it wanted in. Ella screamed once, short, sharp, and then curled forward, body racked with effort. Caleb knelt beside her, pressing a warm cloth to her neck, not speaking. He didn't flinch when her nails dug into his arm, didn't look away when tears rolled silently down her cheek. The firelight danced over the wooden walls. The cabin smelled of steam and wood smoke and salt. Then, just past midnight, the baby came, a cry. Not weak, not wavering, but loud and certain, as if the child was already trying to speak the world into being. Caleb held her while Ella sobbed, not from pain now, but from something deeper, older. Relief, grief, joy that hurt. "It's a girl," he said, voice soft with wonder. Ella reached out and he placed the baby in her arms. She stared at the tiny face, flushed and angry and alive. "Little light," she whispered. Caleb sat beside her, exhausted but still. "You did it," he murmured. "No," she said, eyes locked on the child. "We did." He didn't reply, but he stayed. The peace lasted only a few minutes. A sound came from outside, muffled by snow but clear. A footstep. Caleb's head lifted. Ella froze. The baby stirred. Another footstep. Then the unmistakable creak of the front porch boards. She clutched the baby tighter. Her body was still weak, legs trembling beneath the blankets. Caleb stood, slow and silent. Walked to the wall where the rifle leaned, picked it up. "Stay here," he said, not turning. She nodded, heart pounding. The knock came. 1, 2, 3, calculated, familiar. Caleb opened the door. John stood there, coat dusted. With frost, eyes sunken and mean. He smelled like cold whiskey and stubborn spite. "Evening, Rourke," he said, smiling with too many teeth. "You shouldn't be here," Caleb said. John looked past him, trying to peer inside. "Heard there was a new arrival. Thought I might offer my blessings. You're not welcome." John took a slow step forward. Now. I came unarmed, just wanted to see the child, make sure the mother was, well, she is." John's smile twisted. "You think this is yours to protect. She's not yours, Rourke. Never was. I had plans, promises." Caleb's grip on the rifle tightened. "She made her choice. You just weren't man enough to take no for an answer." John laughed, sharp and sudden. "And you think you are? Think playing nursemaid to someone else's widow makes you a father? Makes you anything but a shadow of a man?" Behind Caleb, a board creaked. Ella stood in the doorway to the bedroom, pale and swaying, the baby cradled in one arm. In the other hand she held a pistol, Isaac's old revolver, cleaned and hidden. Long ago beneath the floorboard, her voice was steady, cold. "You don't speak for me." John blinked, taken off guard. "Ella, that ain't wise, walking around like that. You need rest. You need care." She raised the gun. "I needed safety, and you tried to take it." John's expression changed then, some mix of disbelief and anger. "You'd shoot me? With his child in your arms?" She didn't answer, but the barrel didn't. "Waver, last chance," Caleb said, voice low. John took one more step, and the shot rang out. He staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Blood bloomed bright against the snow. Ella lowered the pistol slowly, arm trembling. John didn't speak. He looked at her, at Caleb, then turned and vanished into the trees, stumbling, gasping, leaving a red trail behind. Caleb closed the door and bolted it, turned to Ella. She looked down at the baby, who had not cried, who only blinked up at her like she understood everything. Caleb took the pistol gently, set it aside. He reached for her arm, helped her back to the bed. She lay down slowly, cradling. The child, breath shallow but strong. He knelt beside the bed. "It's over," he said. Ella nodded. "She's safe now, so are you." He looked at her then, not as a man who had rescued, not as someone owed, but as someone who had stayed. Who would stay? "You don't have to go," she said, voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't planning to." They sat like that for a long time, as the snow fell again outside. No more knocking, no more fear. Just the crackle of fire, the rhythm of breath, and a child between them who had been born in blood and love and defiance. Ella closed her eyes, and for the first time since Isaac's last breath, she slept without dreaming of death. Caleb stayed, awake, watching the cradle, watching her, and when the wind rose again, he didn't shiver, he just stirred the fire, and whispered, "We're still here."